Understanding totems in Upland can be pretty complicated, and that's why we made this guide to help you hopefully understand your totem just a little bit better. So we're going to start by looking at the totem traits. Upland has visual traits and they have mapped attributes. So life form to output, totem base to stamina, etc. We're just going to explain what these attributes really are and the best way to sort of get a guide on what you should be feeding your totem, how often, if you have specific set of, etc. Let's take a look first at totem base. This one is very easy to follow. There are 4 variations, from least to most rare: hexagon, pentagon, square, and circle. Basically what this means is, if you have a circle, you will be able to endure more missed feedings and incur less penalties. If you have a hexagon, you will have likely the worst set of penalties available to you. And Upland does detail this in another post, what the penalties might be. Variation 1, for each spend opportunity you miss, future intervals suffer a yield reduction. So this is compounding, and this is the worst one. Variation 4 being the best one, likely a circular base. Variation 1 is likely attached to the hexagonal base. They just sort of get less and less worse as you move down. So yeah, if you have a hexagonal base, I do think Variation 1 would most likely be applied. Upland likes to work with value, economics, anything they can do to assign value to a specific NFT in a sort of way, i.e. making a circular base a lot more better, they will do. So these circular based totems are likely worth a heck of a lot more money than a hexagonal based totem. If you have a pentagonal base, every time you miss a spend opportunity, the life cycle of your totem shortens by 1 interval. So what this means is, every time you start a life cycle, it's about 30 days, 30 intervals, more or less. If you miss one of those spend opportunities, it's going to go down to 29, 28, 27, and you'll just be missing a few days of protum. Variation 3, you guys can read all that yourself. I think pentagon is about the most common type. If you have a square, you will likely be able to miss up to 5 spend intervals without any penalty whatsoever. After your 6, it'll just stop yielding until you, it says ending the cycle prematurely. Likely meaning you can't claim any more protum for the rest of the month, which would be pretty bad. That is our totem base. Now let's take a look at output, capacity, frequency, or input. We'll move to scale. There are 9 variations, and this is pretty easy, more or less, to understand. Micro to gigantic and epic. I don't know why epic is the top one. This is your capacity, denoting the maximum amount of protum rewards a totem can hold before yielding will stop. Players will need to come back to collect protum yield rewards periodically. Now, this just means how much protum your whole totem will be able to produce. It's an orange with a micro, hexagonal base, whatever. All the worst stats you can possibly have. It'll likely be on more or less an 8-hour feeding schedule. It'll be producing, say, 100 protum a month at the micro scale. Now, when you move up to small, it'll likely increase, say, 25, and you move up to normal, maybe it goes up by another 25, so on and so forth. Epic, maybe you're pulling 250 to 300 protum a month out of it. The larger the size is, the more protum you'll be able to pull out of the month. It's pretty straightforward from there. Now let's take a look at color and frequency. This is how often your plant needs to be fed. And if you listen to the last example, I said orange would likely need to be fed on every 8 hours. The feeding interval is 0 to 50. Now if you divide that by 7, the amount of color variations there are, you get about a 7.1 4-hour interval in between each feeding. Assuming people need to sleep, we need about 8 hours, give or take. That's about the human law, how long you should sleep for. Obviously, people sleep less, people sleep more, whatever. 8 hours, I think, is the orange feeding time, and you could go up from there. It'll be very unlikely Upland ever tries to mess someone over by having it in the middle of their sleep. And obviously it is incredibly hard to plan around this, but if you do some math, you can more or less kind of figure it out. Orange is about 8, and if you increase by about 7.5 to 8 hours from there, you could sort of figure out the other colors. Next is brown, so that would be about a 15-16 hour feeding interval. Purple would be about a 24-hour feeding interval, so on and so forth. Green, 32 hours. Red, 39. Blue, and gold. This is where it gets a little complicated. Blue, I'd put roughly around 45. Gold at the 50 hour mark. The max limit it can be, obviously, because they put the range 0 to 50. Gold, I'm assuming, has to be 50. And it would be incredibly unlikely that the feeding schedule is any faster than 8 hours for orange, as again, people need to sleep. And it would just basically make this whole entire thing completely unfeasible if it was less than 8 hours. Already, 3 times a day is absolutely incredibly dreadful. If you have a busy schedule, keeping an orange totem will be very hard. I am fortunate enough to work from home with my dog business, so I will have a bit of time to spend on this. But if you're not me, I do wish you good luck. Upland also gives you this small equation here to sort of spend appropriately. I don't know if that's in this set of text here. Here they outline making multiple spends within the same interval won't harm the totem, but can lead to wasted protem. That's okay. Ideally, you try to spend close to the center of the interval, which is why we start with these benchmark time zones, about 8 hours for an orange and so forth, increasing by about 7 to 8 hours per color increase. Now let's take a look at style. This is the input category. What does style do? Now this one's a bit more confusing. Color, scale, totem base. This one's a bit more confusing. Totem scale, totem base. We're all pretty easy to understand. We have size and you have shapes. But now we have elegant, gamer, ancient, fantasy, future, and painted and fluid. What are these styles that embody the input attribute? This will represent the total amount of protem spend that generates yields in a cycle. How much protem you put into your totem to receive X amount of protem back. Yeah, it's a bit complicated. So this says top tier totems boast higher yieldable inputs amounts in a cycle, enabling them to earn more protem rewards. It essentially just means how much protem you can earn separate from your cap. So this is per individual spend, how much your maximum protem yield will be. So if you've got elegant, unfortunately, this is the worst one. Gamer being the second worst, ancient being the third worst, and so on. I'm lucky enough, I've got an orange fantasy with a huge scale. I'm presuming we're going to be able to pull a good chunk of protem out of this. If you have an elegant micro, it'll be very tough, especially if you're orange, because you'll be feeding it very frequently for a very small amount of protem return. It should still hopefully be profitable for you to spend your time doing this. I do not know the full numbers of everything. We're just making this to try to help you understand it a bit better. But more or less, yeah, if you have all the worst attributes, you are likely going to be investing a lot more time in protem for smaller yield amounts versus if you had, say, a circle fluid gold totem, which would have you spend the least amount of protem for the most amount of protem in return, and spend the least time doing it. That's sort of Upland's gist of this whole thing. Spend more money to get the better outcome. So this is what I was talking about, the optimal spend amount. It's a very super simple equation. All you do is divide the total protem input by the number of intervals in a cycle. Take your total amount of protem, divide that by 30, and you have more or less what you should be spending on every single interval. Obviously, there will be messages that come up and tell you you're spending too much or too little, and so adjust from there. But to get your first base spend amount, this is a super easy equation to calculate it. Again, divide the total amount of protem input by the number of intervals in a cycle, and this ensures you allocate the right amount of protem for each interval, maximizing your yield effectiveness. And last but not least, we have output. Now this is attached to lifeform, and this is, in my opinion, one of the easier ones to understand. There's apparently 11 types of output curves. I do not count 11 here. This says, let's break down the 11 output curves representing the 11 lifeforms with 6 archetypes of earning journey. I don't understand what these 11 output curves are. I do see the 6 archetypes of earning journeys here. So we have linear, which is just a straight line upwards. We have hockey stick. You'll have slow gain at the start with a very sharp increase, sort of like a hockey stick. You got wave, and you'll ride the wave of rewards as they go up and down. Sharp step, the rewards will very suddenly increase drastically, but it will be a very slow way to get there. Mild step, at some point, your rewards will take a slight step up, but it's noticeable, not the most. And static llama being the best one to the rare totem holders, like Upland's theme here. It is just a very stable and consistent earning pattern, so you never really gotta think twice about this. You don't have to go figuring out your totem too much. And that basically explains all of these totem traits. Now, I highly recommend to go back and watch the video again if you missed anything here, because this is very crucial to understand. In another video, we're going to walk through the math on which attribute gives exactly what value, more or less, given some hypothetical situations here. So we hope you like this video, hope you understand totems just a little bit better. Make sure you keep an eye out for that next video that's about to come out. We'll just be breaking down the math on everything so you can get the best, more or less ideal situation for your totem.